Hello, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the last SAR Insider series episode of 2021. My name is Abby Lehman. I work at L3 Harris Geospatial, and I'm going to be your moderator today. So I was about to say that I am joined again this week by my colleagues Megan and JP, both solutions engineers or SEs at L3 Harris Geospatial. But I logged on this morning to a great surprise. JP is unavailable. He's unavailable. So we're going to kind of wing it a little bit. We do have Austin Coates, who we've had on geospatial distancing in the past. He was actually behind the scenes in the last episode. He was answering some of the questions on the back end. So now you get to see his pretty face. And yeah, hold on, is it? Yeah, there he is. I have a split screen going on. As you can see, I'm in a different location. I'm at my parents' house. It's very fancy, very fancy. So I'll go ahead and just introduce Megan, who you're familiar with if you've seen any of the last episodes. So she's been a part of our organization and spreading the gospel of SAR since 2018. Prior to that, she attended this Colorado School of Mines, and she earned a master's in geophysics from Boise State University. Say hello, Megan.
Hello, everybody, and good morning.
So, as I said, we are joined by colleague Austin Coates. So he is currently a commercial sales engineering manager. Is that still accurate, Austin?
That's accurate.
Okay, good. I had to pull his bio really quickly from one of the old episodes. So he actually specializes in the use of imagery for precision agriculture applications, but I know he should have been on the last one. He was in the background, I promise. So he's worked in the commercial sector at NASA, JPL, NGA, DoD, secure environments, and he's also published author status, which is very fancy. Let's see. So fun facts that I had down here. He has a baby daughter. She's adorable. And he's always fantastically nice to me, which you wouldn't think would be a big deal, but I'm inclined to think that it is. So say hello to everybody, Austin.
Hi, everybody.
All right. So let's go ahead and jump into it. It's going to be a little wild and crazy this time around. For anyone that's unfamiliar with the SAR Insider series, let me give you a very brief overview of what you can expect. So Megan came to me with some amazing case study content for SARscape a few months ago, but a traditional webinar wasn't really the right format for how we wanted to do it. So, and again, this is less relevant now, but at the same time, JP was looking to learn more about SAR. And so if you joined us for those previous episodes, you'll see that Megan kind of was teaching JP more about SAR and using SARscape, using these case studies that she had. So that's what you're going to be part of today, minus JP. And yeah, you're sitting in on a conversation between two nerdy SEs about SAR, and we're talking about how to monitor deforestation. So before we begin, a few quick reminders. The lady bot, as she said at the beginning, this is recorded, and we're going to share the recording plus the slide deck once we're done today. Please use the Q&A button along the bottom to submit your questions at any point during the show. We'll do our best to get to questions as we go, but as you can tell, we're a little short-handed today. If you missed any previous episodes, you can always go back and watch the recordings at our website, l3harrisgeospatial.com. And with that, let's dive into today's episode focused on deforestation. So before I hand it over completely to Megan, I'm going to do something a little bit different today. I'm wondering if you could start out by giving us some insights into why do case studies like this? It seems like it's one of those things that always comes up during these episodes. It's like, yeah, no, this is really great, but why are we doing this? And so I just wanted to give you the chance to kind of talk about why this is so valuable to have this kind of information and why it's valuable as a teaching tool for someone like JP.
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, we get that question every time. And the thing that really is the most important for like whenever you're using anything new or exciting, you're like, what does it even do? How does it even work? But I find particularly with synthetic aperture radar, anyone who's worked in remote sensing, we're all pretty used to optical and LiDAR. Like you see it all the time. There's tons of papers written on it. And in some places like North America, SAR isn't quite as popular. So you stare at it and go, what is this? What does it do? And so, of course, that's what I have to answer for. What is this? So let's SAR, and what does it do? It does, let's make a 7 million different case studies so you can see what it does, how it works, and then do it yourself. Because that tends to be what I found is one of the most difficult things with working with SAR is explaining why you would want to use it with optical or beside optical, or in some cases, if you don't have optical data there, or why would you choose it over LiDAR in some situations? And so actually showing what it can be used for and what it's best used for, because as much as I like to joke with Austin, that SAR is obviously better than optical in every way possible nowadays, because you guys have clouds to deal with. There are obviously times when optical is better too. Like there, I said it. You can record it. This is recorded, Austin. I said it out loud. Because I worked with multispectral and hyperspectral so much in the past, and I do adore them. But you just need to know when and where to use what. And that is why I like doing case studies, because they help people be like, oh, I can use it for that topic, or oh, I can use it for that, or in this case, maybe I want to use hyperspectral.
Well, and in this one, in this episode in particular, you actually are going to be bringing in some optical data to just kind of look at, I don't know if it's a comparison, but just looking at how those processes would be done with the two different ways. And Austin, are you familiar with this case study, or is this like brand new to you?
No, the exciting bit is I know even less than JT. So I get to learn along with everybody. But yeah, I was gonna say, just like kind of on the team, it is really, I feel like SAR is just kind of like another tool in the toolbox, and Megan knows how to use that tool really well. So like we always bounce around ideas internally, and she's always like, oh, you could do it this way. And then I'm like, what about optical? And we could do it this way. She's like, no, it's gonna be better this way. So it is, yeah, I'm always really like excited every time Megan does a case study or anything, because we're going to walk through it and see like, truly, how is this going to work? Like, oh, okay, I see what it's doing here. So it's just it's a neat way, because you get to see essentially the same target, but just through a different like perspective, essentially. So,
grayscale.
Exactly.
I say I feel very,
a little snowier.
I feel very uncool because I don't have my gaming headset. Oh wait, I don't have one, but you guys have one. I feel like
this is my work headset. This is
oh, sorry, not gaming headset.
Yeah,
anyway,
this is very professional.
This is a gaming headset, but anyway.
Megan, do you want to go ahead and share your screen?
Will do.
And we can get started.
Yes. All right. There we go. Should it be clear to see, hopefully? All right, so yeah, this is going to be a fun one, because we're just going to sort of go insane, I think, here. It is still very early morning too. So today, we're going to be going over deforestation. If you were in the last one we did, it's actually using the exact same process that we did last time, that we used for vegetation and crops, which I think can tell you something in and of itself, being that this process that we're going to be going over, intensity time series, is really, really good for vegetation monitoring. But because of that, I thought it would be very boring to just do the same process a second time. So like Abby said, I added in what I lovingly call my Frankenmodel, which we'll be going over in detail, that I use to combine SAR and optical data for processing. However, in this case study, we're going to find out why you want to use SAR and maybe ignore optical is what I found at the end. But, you know, we can have an argument between Austin and I about that. So we can sort of jump right in. So I did a tiny little background slide this time, because hopefully for a lot of people here, deforestation, we know what it is and we know it exists. For this example, I will be focusing on Brazil. A lot of different places in Brazil were actually used for this, because I was just sort of zooming all over the place looking at things. But as of this year, Brazil's deforestation is at a 15-year high. And I would like to separate out, of course, illegal deforestation and logging and just actual working with the forest. So these are two very different topics, and I have once been yelled at in the past for sort of clumping them all together as just deforestation. However, it is a very important topic. There is, oh my gosh, an optical data set that's really well known. It updates every year. I think it's, I've forgotten the name of it, but it is an entire optical data set of forest changes. And it's fantastic. Last I heard it was based on MODIS data, but that was a couple years ago, so it might have been updated. And it's just used to say,
if anyone knows, growth. By the way, which one it is, feel free to enter it into the chat.
Global Forest Watch. Thank
Global
you.
Forest Watch. Fantastic. Thank you, Melvin.
This is why we have all the chat open.
That's
Yeah,
right.
so it's a fantastic data set that goes through and shows where there has been growth or deforestation all over the world. And it uses optical data to do so because it has these just specific standards and stuff that it goes through to do that. The issue is a lot of the world where they have this in legal or illegal deforestation, especially in Brazil, people time it so that it's much more difficult to see. So much of this deforestation in Brazil particularly occurs what is called the cloudy season, which is from around October to April. And then the rainy season is from April to October. But anyway, I had a lot of confusion with that when I was first working on this. And that makes it nearly impossible to get actual coverage of what you're doing, which is why the optical data fusion didn't work very well. But so because of that, we want to use SAR to be able to see those abrupt changes. And that's what we'll sort of be working on today, because this is actually used right now in Brazil to use SAR to track those kind of deforestation changes. And SAR map, we have an example from SAR map, the people who made SARscape, which is what I use for these processes as well. And they actually have they had some very interesting insights on how you can actually find deforestation happening very quickly based upon how it's actually created. So we'll be going over all of that today. But first, I'm going to inundate you with a little bit of background to SAR, like I do every time, and then going over the actual process.
Let's do it.
Let's go. All right, here it is. This is why SAR is cool. Synthetic aperture radar, or SAR, is an active imaging system. So it is able to see through clouds and smoke and view changes on the Earth's surface. And because of this, when we're looking at areas such as the rainforest, which has rain and clouds all the time, sometimes smoke, unfortunately, we're able to see through those and see what's happening on the ground surface and the physical characteristics of that vegetation that we're interacting with. Now, this actually becomes very interesting when we're working on areas around Brazil because of the way they also do agriculture there, which are usually small plots that are surrounded by forested areas. And so it can actually cause confusion in between, is that vegetation growing or is that something else that is occurring in this region? Because in a lot of areas that I work in, when I work with vegetation, it's just fields forever and ever and ever. If you're in America, that tends to, if you're in, the United States, that tends to be how our crops are laid out. France, when I was doing work over there, the same for the rice fields in the area I was specifically looking at was also very similar. It's just fields. When you're working in some other areas, such as South America, some areas of Africa that I did a little bit of work in, it's much more irregular patterning. And so you have to have a longer time series to be like, is this a tree or is this crop? Luckily, trees do give very different signals from crops, so it isn't that bad. But if you are interested in doing deforestation with SAR, that is the first thing you need to be aware of, is make sure you're actually looking at trees, which is where optical does come in handy.
Without a doubt. However, I see some clouds in these images, so slight downfall of optical.
It's the battle of the data sources today on the SAR Insider.
I wouldn't call it a battle. It's friendly jousting. That's all.
Okay. Exactly.
So when it comes to this, though, the bands you choose can actually be really, really important. I use Sentinel-1 for my case studies, which is a C-band system, because it is publicly available and free, which means I can get as much data as I want, see what works, try different things, go a little bit crazy, and then make it so other people can follow my exact process without, like, you're actually able to go get that data and try it yourself, which is a big thing for me with case studies, reproducibility, as every scientist hopes to get in the end. So for this one, a quick refresher is there might be better bands for what there is a better band for what I'm doing here. As you can see from the slide right here, we have 3 major different bands that are shown here, which are X, C, and L. X band mainly interacts because it's the smaller wavelength, it interacts with smaller objects, smaller features, and so it mainly interacts with things like the canopy or the very top of a ground surface. And so you'll get like leaf bouncing responses instead, and it'll hit small things like grass and bush and treetops, and it'll go bouncing away back to our satellite. C band has a little bit of penetration. because it's a little bit of a longer wavelength, so it interacts with some other features a little bit more. And because of this, we're able to see changes in a little bit of the vegetation structure and a little bit more into the ground surface if it is dry and flat, like, or dry and just nothing there, like a desert perhaps. And then you have L band, which is a much longer wavelength and has much better penetration when we're working with vegetation. If I was doing this and I had access to everything in the world, I would love to do this in L band because we're able to get much better changes in between what's actually happening on surfaces, or even test it with X band. But I think that might cause a little bit too much noise for this example, but it'd be fun to see how it differs in between the three. But in this case, I am using C band. And so a lot of the response we're getting is going to be from the top couple inches of any kind of canopy. And this does work well with deforestation because trees, especially clumps of trees, do give a very specific signature response. It's changing all the time though, because the wind exists and the leaves are moving and stuff. But if you've stared at enough grayscale scenes for long enough, it tends to start to make sense.
I have a question, Megan. Oh,
Yeah.
sorry, go ahead. Abby.
No, I was just gonna say that's really cool to see the visual of what the band would actually pick up there at the bottom right. It's cool.
Yeah, I was gonna
visual
say,
person.
So you're calling out dry snow and dry deserty stuff here, but then you got vegetation. So I'm guessing the water's playing a role. That's why you got to have dry stuff, but the vegetation's got water in it too. So like, what's the deal there? How do we see stuff with vegetation, but we can't see it if it was like a dry soil or sorry, a wet soil or something like that?
Yeah, so it has to do with what is called the dielectric constant. I think we did talk about that a little bit last time with JP. And when we're talking about what it bounces off with vegetation, we're hitting the surface structure of an object, and most of it is getting reflected off of that. When it comes to dry sand, we do not have water. You can think of water as clogging our response. The more water there is, the less penetration we're going to have. So it actually is like we can see through clouds, but rain can cause noise.
Okay.
If there is snow on the ground when you're doing like a time series thing, like when I was looking at the highway in Colorado to see why it collapsed, you have to get rid of winter because snow causes so much noise to your process because it's just wet and clumping and being very rude. So, just existing there, unfortunately, that it causes us to not get a response, just sort of eats it all up. And so when we're looking at like really dry, flat desert, we can actually get subsurface penetration, which is fantastic, which is why I really enjoy that example of Burning Man to show people for change detection, because we get absolutely amazing pictures of the before and after. And similarly, this is why Sentinel-1 and other satellite systems are actually used over the ice caps, or why we can use things like GPR to look at glaciers, because we do get some radar penetration depending upon the ice content in the snow cover that it has. And with that, we can actually study the subsurface. It also will tell us if it's wet or dry, which is important to know too.
Nice. So will it see through dry vegetation? Like if I have senescent vegetation, will it start to penetrate deeper and deeper, depending if it gets drier and drier?
That depends more on the band because of what it's hitting and interacting with. So with the just like flat ground surface, we can go straight in and interact with things there, and then it'll hit something and bounce off, or we'll get that response. But with vegetation, there's so much of it that it scatters off of it. So you can get volumetric scattering or surface scattering are the two like actual terms for what it is. And so those two things, when they hit something as complex as vegetation, tend to just go woo all over the place.
Nice. All right. That makes sense. Thanks.
Yeah. All right. And I'm just checking.
Do you have the Burning Man? Are you going to show the Burning Man example? It's very pretty. If not, it's fine.
I do not have the Burning Man.
Then forget I even mentioned it.
Just build suspense, Abby. It's amazing.
Yeah, that's right.
It's the coolest example you've ever seen.
Oh my gosh. So
Alas,
cool.
I do not have it prepared.
It may be on a blog somewhere though. We may be able to find it out there.
All right. So we will be going over then the process that I will be using for this one. And so I would like to say though, of course, moisture does have, like related to that back one, moisture in vegetation does affect things. because it is what is called the dielectric constant and it exists in everything. But when we're talking about the complexity of it, it also has to do with the complexity of the surfaces as well. So I'm not saying moisture doesn't exist.
Would you say it's constant? It's everywhere.
It might be. But all right, so this one is once again the intensity time series workflow. This is a process that only uses what we would see in optical as the reflectance response, not the complex, the imaginary side of the wave. So when we're doing things, other techniques such as coherence change detection or interferometry, we use sort of the real and the imaginary portion of things. For intensity time series, we only use the real portion of things. And I always think these are pretty important to show because most people know SAR for creating interferograms or creating DEMs. And those processes can take a little bit of time to wrap your brain around if it's something you're very new with. And so showing off what you can do just with the base data set is pretty important. Like, yeah, no, I could just go and get some pretty cool responses here. So in this case, we have a lovely little screenshot of the first step. This is where you load in your files. I think this one was 12 different Sentinel-1 scenes from October to April or something like that to get a coverage over the entire season during the cloudy season. After that, we do what is called multi-looking, which averages over the scene in the azimuth and range direction. And this is sort of how the scene is collected with SAR, is we're collecting it as it's moving in a non-native direction. And so it's a little bit skewed. And so to get square pixels, we have to do some averaging. And this also gets rid of some of the noise, or well, speckle technically isn't noise. It just exists in SAR because that's how it's collected. But that's how we remove some of the speckle from our scenes, so they don't look quite as noisy. There's no other way to say it. There probably is, but the next step is the most important for time series analysis, and that is co-registration between our scenes. This is making sure every scene is stacked directly on top of each other. Every pixel matches. So if we click on a pixel over time, we can make sure that it is the same pixel that we're tracking to see what kind of changes are occurring. And with this system and with how SAR looks at geo everything, we can actually get true geo registration to our surface. And so synthetic aperture radar is actually used in a lot of other times to things like create GCPs for optical data because it has such great registration. So I don't need to worry about that ever, you know, just chuck it in there and I'm like, I know exactly where I am probably.
I actually have a question really quick that came in. So can you use radar images from different missions to make intensity time series?
That's an interesting one. So we talked about, so I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes on this. So we talked about on the first one that you have to use the exact same sensor and the exact same angle and that kind of stuff for coherence change detection. Now for intensity time series, you're not generating an interferogram. So I'm going to be yelled at. You could technically, but not really. Like I would say it's within the realm of possibilities if you have all your data as an SLC format and put it in together, or excuse me, in a geo format or put it in together into this process. I would say you will probably get better results doing it with the same sensor because you'll be looking at the same resolution and band and like from the same angle, but that doesn't necessarily mean you can't look at multiple sensors with intensity time series because in the end, all you're doing is taking their geo response on the ground surface and stacking them together to see how it changes over time. So if you're able to get, this is like looking at Landsat and MODIS in a stack together. As long as your things are, so Landsat has, a 30-meter resolution and MODIS has like a 200-meter resolution. And so as long as things are properly geo-registered to each other, you can do what any kind of chaos you want to them in the end. I can definitely attest to that. But you might, like, MODIS pixels are huge compared to Landsat pixels or compared to Sentinel-2 pixels. So if you're looking for specific information and it is from different sizes or doesn't have the same kind of coverage, just like with optical data, it might not be the best fit. It's like when you're doing time series analysis, you tend to try to stick to one system unless you're doing a comparison in between two systems, and then you do it that way. And so I will say it's possible and then I'm going to be yelled at later by the actual true SAR experts of the world. But I don't think you could do it. Probably not the best way to do things, though.
Kind of building onto that question, and also going to show how much I don't know about SAR. But so in like the optical world, say I have two red bands, and it's like, oh, these are both red. But in reality, they may cover a slightly different portion of like the electromagnetic spectrum. So the wavelengths are slightly different, but they're both called red. Whereas the SAR world, you got like C band. It's just C band. Is it so specific that, oh, I see that you got like 1 to 2 gigahertz. So like sensor 1 and sensor 2 might actually have slightly different collections. Okay, so your intensity return might actually be a little bit different because the C band that you're saying is not like dead on 1.2 gigahertz or whatever. It's like, it's a little bit different.
Yeah, I think there can be a little bit of wiggle room, though I haven't ever actually compared them. So that is a fantastic question that I actually don't know the answer to. But I have it here. See? But yeah, no. So yeah, I haven't actually. Now I'm going to have to look at that as comparing multispectral to panchromatic bands. That seems fun. All right. And then, so co-registration, amazing. Always do it, especially with Sentinel-1 data. Do it with Sentinel-1 data. The next step is the de Grande spatiotemporal filtering, which is, I nerded out a little bit about this one last time, so we'll just sort of continue with it. But this is an amazing filter that filters over space and time to remove atmospheric effects, because we can have some. They're just not quite as problematic as they are with optical data, as in completely covering our surfaces. Making sure everything is the same and getting rid of speckle and noise over space and time in all of our scenes. That's why when we're using intensity time series tools, we like to have 3 or more scenes, because that way we can use this amazing filter and get our good results from it. So very useful. Always do it. The next step is putting things where they're supposed to be. As I said, we're collecting SAR at a non-nadir angle. We're actually at an angle looking down at the Earth's surface, and so things can be upside down and backwards. And that is really cool and all, and it would be fun to keep working in that system. Unfortunately, we work in a world where we have to use maps that have like north arrows on them, and things actually need to be proper resolutions. So we have to go through and put it where it is supposed to be on the Earth's surface. And then once we do that, we can make sure everything is comparable to each other with radiometric calibration and pull out some multi-temporal features. Now, these are the features that are actually really useful, especially when looking at this example of deforestation, because they will highlight areas where there has been major changes and even pick up the specific times in which those changes occur, which for us looking at deforestation, mildly useful to know when it actually happened. All right, and then we have a gigantic gray image on the screen. It's beautiful. So this is one of the outputs over an area in Brazil I was looking at. And don't you worry, this is not all deforestation. There is a lot of ag going on here. And so this is an interesting example because we're looking at this change detection between, I think it was the first and the last image. And what we're seeing here is these areas, or excuse me, the reflectance response here, as these dark areas that you can see in your scene, the areas that are really dark there, that is the trees in this scene. The areas that are very bright with that very bright response are the areas that were more ag or flat ground in the specific scene in particular. Now, this is different from normal because I had the scale switched. I'm sorry. Usually you're getting a very bright or a very scattered response from trees. But in this case, I was looking at the change detection in particular. And this is how we start to get an understanding of what our scenes look like. And so we can see here, we've got a lot of just interspersed agriculture and dry land interspersed with trees all over the place. And this is where it can become really confusing if you're using optical data. Because as I said on our vegetation one, our agriculture one, green is green is green. You can have some variation if you're using hyperspectral data sets. But if you have growing crops and trees and your resolution isn't fantastic, then the response in between them is going to look very similar. And so whenever I'm actually looking at trees, I actually do joint SAR and optical models nowadays because SAR has such unique responses. So then if we look
there,
here,
it is.
It's our pink. Helvi was waiting for the pink picture. Here we have our coefficient of variation in red, our mean in green, and our gradient in blue. And so we can see the areas where we have our highest responses throughout our scene. Green, mean, means our normal scattering response was always the highest. And this is one of the best ways to classify trees, because as you can see, trees have a very high reflectance response pretty much all the time. Well, they're mean anyway. Like if you did max, it still works as well because it's always very bright. But they just have a consistently high mean because they're scattering it everywhere because they have leaves on them, especially in the rainforest, because we don't have, they continue. They don't do what we have up here in our exceptionally cold Colorado at the moment where nothing has leaves anymore. And so because the vegetation is just there and continuing, you're getting very nice responses, even if they change day to day, depending upon the wind or if it's raining and it's making the leaves move around and such. And then we see our areas with their coefficients of variation. And so these are areas where major change has occurred. And we're getting a very good look at areas with our agriculture and some areas with deforestation as well. Because a lot of times in these areas where you have such limited agricultural fields, you need bigger ones. And so you cut them down. However, there are laws and limitations to what you're actually allowed to do versus what you actually do. And this is why this tool is used so often in Brazil, is because landowners have a specific area that they're allowed to have agriculture in, but that doesn't mean that's all they want to have in it. Or in other cases, such as with the SAR map example later on, there are some areas where you're not supposed to be cutting down trees that, if no one's watching, some people might. So these are two pretty good examples of why we want to use this. And one particular use case that I remember from a couple years ago is someone with like known agricultural land plots wanted to know if people were cutting down trees and around those plots. And so with SAR, you could get the before and like have shape files of those agricultural plots available for you in ENVI or whatever, and like have them overlaid as ROIs or shape files, and then see the changes outside of them, such as some of these areas in the lighter purple, where we can see some smaller changes that might have occurred later in the season that might have to do with trees being cut down in areas. And then you can go back and check, is that something that we could actually have happen here?
That's awesome. On the optical side, that's like super hard. Our pixels are big, everything just looks green. You're like, is it still a tree or is it now just ground cover? What is happening here? So the fact that you can see scatter, that's like super cool.
Yeah, there is, of course. I will give this one. There's always confusion. There you go. No. Just optical is still very good. Like you can have areas where the trees are only partially cut down or they're interspersed. And with C-band, interspersion of agriculture and trees is really, you can't see it.
Oh, okay.
With L-band, you can actually get more into those details. Oh, another good example of this is looking at the California mountainsides. You can see areas where specific large areas of beautiful trees have been cut down to grow other kinds of crops that weren't always supposed to be there before.
Wine crops?
High value boutique crops?
No, Austin has it more than wine crops.
Oh, okay.
I forget, what did we call that one? But it's weed, in case you're wondering what I'm making euphemisms to. It is also can be used in those cases as well. So you can actually see areas where trees have been cut down and then other crops have been planted or other structures have been created in the case of greenhouses without having to worry about cloud cover. So that exists too.
Nice.
Done a lot with trees. This is the maximum reflectance. So over the entirety of the scene, we're getting our areas where we have our maximum reflectance. And once again, that exceptionally bright response we get is the trees. We're able to see it pretty much everywhere in the scene. And those areas that are very, very dark, I think it's around the middle of our scene and a little bit to the north, is water. The areas in our crops that are very dark are areas that are most likely had a lot of water or were flat for most of our scenes, because most of the response is hitting the ground and going away or getting eaten by the moisture that exists there, or reflected away as it would be. And so we can actually see, just if you're doing analysis and processing, this is our starting point. This is our maximum reflectance. We can see where our trees are. And from that, we can see where the trees went. We know what happened to them, and actually do it like that. I have next, because we're about halfway through on our time limit, and I do want to talk about the model, is something that I commonly do with my time series techniques. And this one is sort of not the best colors, but it does prove a point, where our different days are different times, or excuse me, our different bands are different days. Red is March 5th, oh, this was actually another example over the rainy season versus the cloudy season, which was the last one. I did a lot of work on this one and it's sort of all over the place right now because I was having a bit too much fun with it. But so we have March 5th, which is our red, June 9th, which is our green, and August 8th, which is our blue. And so you can still see those variations in areas of when specific things such as specific crops had higher reflectance responses. So you can look at the stages and you can actually see a little bit into the forest how there is some color variation at the edge of the ag. And in this case, because this is the rainy season, there isn't quite as much deforestation usually, but we're able to see some color variations that are occurring out there. And it also has a sort of nice little rainbow color in some of the areas as opposed to the sort of brown color it has as well. But wanted to show like, you do the exact same thing with optical data. So I thought I'd show it off here. Usually have some better color spread though, but you know, we can't win them all. So colors. Once again, this is during the rainy season, not the cloudy season. And this is from March 5th to August 8th. And so the previous ones were the cloudy season. And then I wanted to show these from the rainy season because they look like absolute disasters. And I think it's very important to talk about that. So this one is the gradient date. What that means is this is the date when there is just the largest gradient in between our images. And so you can see that a lot of our stuff in our big agricultural fields, so if I go back here and go here, like is a light green color, which means our major changes happened in June. A lot of the other stuff was in March, and then a little bit of spreading around that was in August. And this is really important having to do with that timing I said at the beginning. When the cloudy season, which a lot of the deforestation usually occurs in, is from October to March-ish, even though this is the opposite season, we start to see these sort of more disparate areas that are changing around the edges of it. Versus in the middle, we see areas that are commonly changing around May, June, and July, which more have to do with the fields themselves. And so with that, we're actually able to pick up time areas changes, specific areas of interest changes. And if I had interspersed SAR scenes through like all of August or all of October, like I do with cloudy season, you'll actually be able to see within each timeline when specific changes were occurring. But when looking at deforestation and ag in particular, one of the best so these are all automatic outputs, I should say, of the intensity time series. I don't have to do any work for these. They just exist. I can go in and take a look at them and see what they do. You know, I'm just showing you really weird pictures on the screen and I should explain that. I'm sorry.
So wait, so are these, so when you say it's automatic, does that mean you did it in analytics, or does that mean, sorry, I should say ENVI SARscape analytics, or did you do it in full version of SARscape, or does that not really matter?
It doesn't really matter. Both will give you pretty much the same outputs. It's just, it will do it. So like these outputs having you can choose a bit more of the statistical outputs like these if you're using full ENVI SARscape, but you still get min and gradient, that kind of stuff from the SARscape analytics as well.
Got it.
And you said the gradient was the largest change. So you like stick in all your images and then one image comes back and says like, these are the dates with the most amount of change possible?
In between two dates, because it is a time, yep. So it is a time series, so it's not doing like the total. It is choosing a specific date to show that. And yeah, so it has, that is, you know, it's not gonna be like, everything has changed, but. So this is probably one of the most valuable statistical tools, and that is why I've not written a name on it. This is the minimum date. And so this is the date when we have our lowest value for our scene. And when looking at comparing this to that maximum reflectance we had or the max date, which we can also look at, this is really valuable for looking at our trees, because as you can see, most of our trees are red. Actually, most everything is red. Our minimum date for most everything is the 8th of August, most likely having to do with just changes in what's happening around there. But some areas are sticking out a lot more for showing up in July and March, and a little bit in like April and May. And so this automatic classification in areas where you know what ag is and what trees are can be used to separate out, like you can find an exact shapefile of what has occurred in that area. With that then, I'm actually going to look at some of the SAR map examples because they did a lot of really good examples on this. And we're just going to look at one here. So in this one, yeah, a lot of just deforestation occurs during the rainy and cloudy season. And they have this lovely example over a much larger area than I did because I actually had time to process it all. And what we can see when we're using SAR in these examples with that time series analysis is the exact times deforestation occurs down to a 2-week period. And we get these classification results in where we can grab those out and see the changes that are there. And this is a really good example by SAR map. I wasn't able to get quite as cool as an image, so that's why I'm using theirs here. But something else they found is that in areas where it is not sort of agriculture based, like where you're a little bit further out into the wilderness doing some maybe illegal, maybe legal things out there, is you can actually catch deforestation very quickly because the first thing that happens is a landing strip is put down. So a very large patch of area is flattened, very flattened, which is one of the easiest things to see with SAR. Then roads are created, and then the cutting begins. And so if you're able to catch this with synthetic aperture radar data to catch that flattening and that road creation, you can catch the deforestation right as it starts, more or less. And so we're able to do what SAR is best at, which is monitoring.
I have a quick question. I saw one in the chat, someone asked if you ground check any of this.
I try, and in this one, for example, I really tried. I tried so hard. So for the last two, for the vegetation, rice, and then for the forest one, I do go in and I look at any kind of imagery, any kind of news reports. I look at what's happening in the area. I've been looking at a lot more weather recently to make sure everything is kosher. So I do go in and ground check. And I really tried to do that for this one because in the beginning, I did make a huge mistake. I was looking at an area and I was like, this is really cool. What's happening here? Ends up there was wetlands. So really glad I checked that because that was causing it to look different than it should. So I do go and try. However, as we're about to see, it was really difficult for this case, even with all of the internet at my disposal, because there were so many clouds the entire time. So this is a spoiler, but all of that red we see in this image, that bright red, this is the best image I could find over in or those red are from an optical image, which was the best image I could find for the entire year, cloud-wise. Everything else was completely covered, which is why, you know, obviously SAR is better when looking at deforestation in Brazil. But so I do try to ground truth everything. I do try to go in and do my due diligence on stuff. If I miss stuff, yeah, I could. I'm unfortunately not in Brazil. I can't get out there anytime soon and actually see what's happening. And so I do try my best. And that's why I do these and I try to fill in every detail I can, but I can still make mistakes here and there all the time. Caught the wetlands though.
This is less pretty than the other ones. What on earth is going on here?
All right, so this is what I lovingly call, as you can see from the explanation mark, my Frankenmodel. And so, like I said, when I'm looking at trees, I tend to like to do optical and SAR, meshing them together. And so this is what I use to do that. And please don't be afraid because the optical part is the part that looks scary. So I'm actually going to share my screen here so you guys can, so you can take a quick look at that. Not too long because we are like sort of almost out of time, but long enough. So let me grab share screen.
Let's blame JP. That.
I mean, if you say so. All right, so we should have my lovely Frankenmodel up now in the ENVI modeler. And a little tiny brief background on the ENVI modeler is the system that allows you to take pretty much any of the ENVI and SARscape tasks that exist and create them into automatic models. And I use this a lot for combining optical and SAR because I don't want to do the work myself. So what this is it takes Sentinel-1 data, and in this case, very particularly Sentinel-2 data, and combines them into a band stack. So I'm going to grab this right here because this is our lovely, this is the SAR section. That's it. That's all we have right there. This does the intensity time series process that I just went over, but with little boxes instead of having to click through a menu. So it has importing our data, multi-looking it, getting rid of speckling. There was some co-registration stuff, except this is one seed at a time. So you don't actually need to co-register the scenes to each other. If you have a DEM, you can co-register those. This is my quick and dirty version. I'm sorry. Geocoding it and then turning it into a raster. And so this is entirely the SAR processing part of that model. It's the optical part that's scary, trust me. And you set values in here. You can say the same kind of values that you set in SARscape, but once you set them and save them, or if you have them as a preference file, you'd never have to touch it again. It's good. Now, the scary part has more to do with how Sentinel-2 works than anything else. I'll give it that. Sentinel-2 has a lot of different resolutions. It has 10 meter, 20 meter, and 60 meter for some of the larger wavelength bands. Because of this, if we want to compare things, I actually have to make them all cut the same way in the same bounding boxes, more or less. They need to be the same resolution to be able to work with some of our systems in ENVI, especially when I want to stack them all together. So why this looks horrifying is because I'm doing the same process for 10, 20, and 60 meters. So I'm taking an ROI that I use for both my optical and my SAR scene, and I'm cutting down my raster so it's not quite as horrendous to work with for both of them. Then I need to make sure I keep the band information and the names. And so I'm using this tool called extract properties and metadata, because it stores it there and it's like, this is my band information and name and I shall keep it forever. And then I need to stick them all together, which is this little aggregator thing right here. This little box that I'm chucking around all over the place. Once that's done, I can stack them all on top of each other. I can do my radiometric calibration. I can do my atmospheric correction, and then I can stack them with my SAR data. And that is this last little area down here. It's just stacking everything together to make sure it's good to go. Now, when you're doing this, you need to make sure that your SAR data is linear, not decibel. And you might have to do a little bit of scaling. And there are a lot of different, there's a lot of different band math things you can do for that scaling. And the reason for this is because it has to be comparable to the optical data. If you're in reflectance or if you're in radiance, in this case, it does give a radiance output. I have a different one for reflectance that takes even longer to run. Because if you are working in dB for your SAR, or decibel for your SAR, and you're working with reflectance for optical, the scaling of your data values are going to be so insanely different that if you try to use classification, it will be exceptionally skewed because there is such a humongous difference in between. There's some classifications that do work, but most will just be like, whew, okay, I guess the only SAR value matters in this one, and that kind of thing. And so there's a lot of different scaling techniques you can do. In this one, I think I did just keep it. I have a little band math thing here, but you want to make sure it's linear and you want to make sure it's scaled so you can actually compare them. And there's quite a few papers on sort of looking at that kind of stuff.
It's a lot.
Yeah,
this is my crazy model.
It's pretty awesome though. I was looking at it and it looks like so your input parameter box, so because you have that, essentially it's generic. Like this isn't tied to just a single SAR scene. You made this so that you could run it like if you have a new SAR scene, if you have a new Sentinel scene, you can throw it in there.
Yeah.
Also,
go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, the fact that you have that input parameter too, my brain is like, oh man, how could you like take this to the max? And you could throw an iterator on the front of it and run like so many scenes through it.
Yep. I'm trying not to break my computer, but but yeah, like Austin said, I use this for any scene, and I've actually labeled it all correctly, so I remember what I'm doing with it every time. And so I'll be like, what is my SAR image? My 10 meter Sentinel-2 data, my 20 meter, my 60, an ROI in a shapefile, for my SAR data, and an ROI in my ENVI format if I want it for my area of interest for my optical data, and then also a DEM file for the SAR as well. And so I just make sure to have these things, which I always do when I'm working with SAR. And then I just hit go and I sit back and I do something else while it's processing.
So we're at about 10 minutes to the hour right now, and I feel like my silly questions maybe covered up any of Austin's questions that he might have had along the way. Austin, what do you think, looking at all this SAR stuff for the optical guy?
Yeah, I think it's awesome because I think it's super cool to fuse the two of them together. Because even like, so Megan had made like a kind of an offhand comment about landing strips and how easy they are to find with SAR. And in my head, I'm like, oh yeah, I can find it with optical, but I just got to figure out like what dirt looks like and then do like a spectral, like, yeah, so I got to do stuff like that. And then I'm guessing on the SAR world, you're just looking for like any kind of like specular reflectance, like any kind of like nice shiny bit. Energy comes down,
Resolution
bounces
dependent
off.
though.
Yeah, of course. But like, are there other things like that you're like, oh yeah, this is so easy to find in SAR? Like, is there stuff that are like glaringly obvious?
Things that are being built on flat ground, and I did put that in on purpose, on flat ground, because you're able to see the reflectance increase greatly, like when a building is being created. So commonly used for areas of construction or even around mines when there are changes, that kind of thing too. So we might have difficulty with optical because dirt is dirt, unfortunately. But if there are major changes, you'd be able to see that with SAR. That being said, there are times, of course, when, let's say you have a really bumpy ground area or forest, like I had issues with Paradise when I was looking at the campfire. With the resolution of Sentinel-1, I could not see the difference between the town and the forest around it because it was all just reflectance. With higher resolution, with different bands, I might have been able to, but otherwise it was impossible, unfortunately. But for things that are same color, so desert, tire tracks in deserts, SARmap did an amazing case study looking at mines that you can see, or tire tracks were showing where mines are being buried and that kind of stuff, or looking at the creation in desert and that kind of things. That's where, like, because color doesn't matter, then we can still see it.
Yeah,
yes, it does. So
yeah, that structure stuff I think is like, it just opens up a whole new world, because anytime you start fusing it together, I'm like, oh man, there's so much more you can get out of this data now that you have like not only the spectral response, but now you also have the texture. What's it actually, how's it built up? So yeah, I think that's really cool. I also have a really, like, once again, dumb question because I don't know anything about this, but you kept saying linear. You got to make sure your data is linear. What do you mean by that? Like the last bit when you're combining it, like what is that?
Good question. When you're doing your intensity time series outputs, you can actually choose whether to have a linear output or a dB output.
Okay.
And that's literally, it's just how it is converted.
Oh, okay.
So dB, oh, go ahead.
Oh, no. Yeah. I was gonna say, what are those things?
I do not want to explain decibels. I understand it, and I'm sorry. I cannot. Anyway, but it's just the output values that are used. And so decibel is an exponential scale and is actually better to use for agriculture. You actually want to be in dB scaling when you're looking at agriculture. It's just more natural, I guess. It's been a while since I talked to SARmap about this. I'm sorry, I won't give the best response, but I think it works better from what I remember them saying. And linear is just the dB put into linear. Just there's just the expressions and stuff. And it has all that in, like, in every single one of these tools, there's a little question mark at the bottom that you can click on, and it will tell you exactly what they're doing. It'll link to the papers that are used for the processes in the background. So if you're sitting there like, she doesn't know any, like, she's not telling me about the linear scaling, I'm sorry, I don't remember it. But there are resources available, so you can go in and actually see it's not just like randomly throwing numbers in the air and that kind of thing.
No, that's helpful. Yeah, even just that comment about like decibels is exponential and linear is linear. So it's like, oh, okay, I understand it now, or at least understand how that could be complicated in trying to get it into the same scale as optical imagery.
Yep. And I want to talk about this real quick because I made the slide just for you, Austin. But this image that we were looking at was that blue was VV, green is VH, and red is red. Unfortunately, clouds are really evil. So even when I was trying to get an absolutely beautiful combination like I did once over the Skinny Atlas Lake in New York, where I had red, green, and then SAR imagery to show everyone how the optical combination looks here, as I said, this is the best scene I could find over the entire year for cloud cover. So I thought I would show you a beautiful picture of a cloud where 1 and 2 are our SAR scene responses, and this is in radiance, not in reflectance. Forgive me. And then we have the rest of our responses here too. So, and that is really useful most of the time, but like I said, I was sort of sad, only clouds. Yeah.
That was fantastic. We only have about 5 minutes left, so I'll go ahead and start to wrap. Obviously, JP was not here. We miss you. Hope you're feeling better. Yeah, I'll go ahead and wrap it up. As I said at the beginning, this is the last SAR Insider of the year. We may be doing some next year. You'll just have to be surprised. And we may even bring Austin into the mix because now he's made the mistake of proving himself. So you may see his face again. Just a reminder again that the recording of this episode and of course recordings of previous episodes, they'll be accessible on the website. And if you attend the webinar, you'll also get an email with a link to those. And of course, the presentation slides, so you can see those lovely, lovely photos. All right, well, thank you so much, Austin, Megan. Thanks for figuring it out, staying on your toes.
Of course, thanks for having me.
Great. Yep, I hope everyone has a great end of the year. See you in 2022. Bye.
Yeah. See you later.
Bye.